In June of 1942, a 16-year-old boy standing just 5'5" and weighing only 110 pounds walked into a U.S. Marine recruiting office in Greenville, Texas. The recruiter didn't even look up from his desk. He just laughed. "Too small, kid. Come back when you grow up." The Navy rejected him. The Army paratroopers told him the same thing. Go home. By every military standard, Audie Murphy was useless. A walking fatal flaw. The problem wasn't just his size. It was everything. He looked 12. His voice hadn't fully changed. His hands were soft from lack of manual labor. He had no high school diploma, having dropped out in 5th grade. No references, no skills the military valued. He was, by the standards of 1942 America, disposable. But the recruiters had made a fatal mistake. They saw a boy with a baby face and a scrawny frame. They didn't see what the crushing poverty of Hunt County, Texas had created. They didn't see the eyes of a hunter who had been keeping his family from starvation for 5 years with a .22 rifle. They didn't see the cold arithmetic of survival that poverty had burned into his soul. If I don't hit what I shoot at, my family doesn't eat tonight. That wasn't motivation. That was mathematics. This boy's name was Audie Murphy. And in 30 months, this too small reject would become a one-man army who would single-handedly stop an entire German company by climbing onto a burning tank destroyer that was seconds from exploding and firing its .50 caliber machine gun for an hour while calling artillery fire on his own position. The story doesn't begin on a battlefield in France. It begins in the dirt-poor cotton fields of Hunt County, Texas. Audie was born on June 20th, 1925, in Kingston, Texas, the 6th of 12 children. His father, Emmett Murphy, was an impoverished sharecropper who drifted in and out of the family's life before finally abandoning them completely during the Great Depression. His mother, Josie Bell Murphy, held the family together through sheer will and back-breaking labor. They lived in a sharecropper's shack with no electricity, no running water, and rarely enough food. The walls had gaps you could see daylight through. In winter, the children slept 3 to a bed for warmth. In summer, they picked cotton from dawn to dusk for pennies. The Great Depression hit Hunt County like a sledgehammer. Cotton prices collapsed from 18 cents a pound to 6 cents. Banks foreclosed on farms. Families starved. The Murphys were among the poorest of the poor. The children wore clothes made from flour sacks. They ate whatever Audie could hunt or trap. Squirrels, rabbits, possums when times were desperate. When Audie was 12 years old, his mother scraped together enough money to buy him a single-shot .22 rifle. It wasn't a gift. It was a job. A neighbor, Mrs. Lee, later recalled young Audie's ability. That boy could drop a running rabbit at 50 yards with iron sights, could hit a squirrel in the head at 40 yards so he wouldn't ruin the meat. Never saw anything like it. But this wasn't sport. This was mathematics. Calculate distance. Factor wind. Anticipate movement. Lead the target. Aim where it will be in half a second, not where it is now. Fire once. 1 bullet, 1 kill. Because bullets cost money. Misses meant hunger. Under that pressure, day after day, year after year, Audie Murphy didn't just learn to shoot. He learned to kill with cold efficiency. He developed a hunter's patience, spending hours motionless, waiting for the perfect shot. He developed a predator's instinct for vulnerability, understanding exactly where to aim for instant kills. And he developed an understanding that hesitation, that thinking too much, meant failure. When his mother died of pneumonia in 1941, shortly after Audie turned 16, he became the head of the family. A 110-pound boy responsible for 11 younger siblings. He tried to keep them together. He worked odd jobs. He hunted. He picked cotton. It wasn't enough. Eventually, the younger children were parceled out to relatives in orphanages. The guilt of that failure never left Audie Murphy. When Pearl Harbor was attacked on December 7, 1941, Audie saw his chance. The Army meant steady pay, 3 meals a day, money to send home, a purpose. He tried to enlist the very next week. He was rejected. Too young, just 16. Come back when you're 18. For 6 months, he tried every recruiting office within 50 miles. The Marines laughed. Too small. The Navy turned him away. Doesn't meet minimum weight requirements. The Army paratroopers told him to grow up first. Finally, his older sister Corinne helped him forge an affidavit claiming he was 18. In June 1942, Audie walked into a regular Army recruiting office in Greenville, Texas. The recruiter, Sergeant Thomas. Keller looked at the forged papers. He looked at the boy, who looked more like 14 than 18. He sighed deeply. The United States was 6 months into a war it was losing. They needed bodies. Any bodies. Keller stamped the papers. The United States Army had just accepted a field modification that would save hundreds of American lives. They just didn't know it yet. Private Audie Murphy reported to Camp Walters, Texas, for basic training in July 1942. The drill sergeants rode him mercilessly. They called him baby. They called him kid. One sergeant said he looked like a recruitment poster for the Boy Scouts. They thought he was a mascot. The other recruits didn't know what to make of him. Private First Class David Mossour, who trained with Murphy, recalled, "We all thought he was somebody's little brother who had tagged along. The drill sergeants made him carry extra weight during marches to make up for being underweight. They made him do push-ups until he collapsed. They thought they could break him or toughen him up. Then they got to the rifle range. Those baby blue eyes went cold as winter. He never missed. Not once. Every target at every distance. Perfect scores. 50 out of 50 at 100 yards. 50 out of 50 at 300 yards. The instructors thought the scoring was wrong. They made him do it again. Same result. The drill instructors stopped laughing. They started watching. In January 1943, Murphy shipped out with Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, 3rd Infantry Division. They called themselves the Marne Division. They were headed for North Africa first, then Europe. His first real combat was Sicily in July 1943. In the mountains near Palermo, his platoon was pinned down by a German MG-42 machine gun nest. The German MG-42 could fire 1,200 rounds per minute. It could cut a man in half. Standard doctrine said wait for support. Call in artillery or tanks. Don't expose yourself. Murphy's doctrine, learned in Hunt County, said my family doesn't eat if I wait. While the others took cover, Private Murphy studied the terrain. He saw a dried creek bed that provided concealment. He saw a boulder that would give him an angle on the German position. Without asking permission, without telling anyone his plan, he began moving. He used the terrain the way he'd used gullies and trees stalking rabbits. Silent, patient, invisible. He worked his way around to the German flank. He was 30 yards away when he threw 2 grenades into their position. The Germans were stunned. Before they could react, Murphy was firing his M1 Garand. He eliminated the entire crew. 4 Germans dead. Then he did something that showed his tactical instinct. He turned their own MG-42 on the retreating German forces. His platoon, watching from cover, couldn't believe it. That was the moment they realized Audie Murphy wasn't a boy. He was a weapon. His captain, Paul Harris, recommended him for a Bronze Star with V device. The citation read, "This soldier displays a natural aptitude for combat that is extraordinary." That was an understatement. Sicily was just the beginning. During the Italian campaign from September 1943 to June 1944, Murphy transformed from a good soldier into a walking nightmare for the Wehrmacht. The Italian mountains were a different kind of hell than Sicily. Steep slopes, ancient stone buildings converted to fortresses, machine gun nests in every village. The Germans knew this terrain. They had spent months fortifying it. Every hill was a killing ground. At the Volturno River in October 1943, Murphy's platoon was ordered to secure a crossing point. They advanced through an olive grove when a German counterattack hit them from three sides. The MG-42 fire was devastating. Men were cut down in seconds. The lieutenant, a young West Point graduate on his first combat mission, was killed by a burst that nearly cut him in half. The platoon sergeant took shrapnel to both legs and couldn't move. The radio operator was dead. 18 men were pinned down with no leadership, no communication, and no way out. Murphy was still a private. He had no authority to give orders. But he had something more important. He had a cool head and a hunter's instinct. Without asking permission, without announcing his intentions, Murphy grabbed the dead lieutenant's binoculars and studied the German positions. 3 machine gun nests, 2 in stone farmhouses about 400 yards away, 1 in a ditch at 250 yards. Standard doctrine said call for artillery and wait, but the platoon didn't have time. The Germans were maneuvering to encircle them. Murphy grabbed a Springfield sniper rifle from a wounded scout. He had never fired this particular weapon before. He took up a position behind a stone wall, and he went to work. The first shot dropped the gunner in the ditch. 250 yards. Clean kill. The Germans didn't know where the shot came from. They hesitated. Murphy worked the bolt, aimed, fired. The assistant gunner fell. Now the Germans were scrambling. Murphy shifted his aim to the farmhouse positions. These were longer shots, 400 yards. Wind was gusting from the left. He compensated. Fired. A German officer, who had been directing fire from a window, collapsed. Murphy kept firing, 1 shot every 30 seconds, methodical, calm, no wasted ammunition. After 20 minutes and 5 confirmed kills, the German fire slackened. After an hour, it stopped. The Germans withdrew. Murphy had broken the counterattack single-handedly. When reinforcements finally arrived 2 hours later, they found Murphy still at his position, rifle ready, watching the German lines. His company commander, Captain James Hardy, recommended him for the Distinguished Service Cross, the second highest decoration in the U.S. Army. The citation noted his extraordinary coolness under fire and his initiative in a leadership vacuum. Then came Anzio, in January 1944. The blood-soaked beachhead Churchill called the Wildcat, a meat grinder, where men died by the thousands in a space barely 6 miles deep. The Allied landings had been meant to outflank German defenses and capture Rome. Instead, the Germans surrounded the beachhead and began systematically destroying it. German artillery had every inch of ground mapped. You couldn't move during daylight without drawing fire. Men lived in holes in the ground like rats. Murphy's unit was dug in near the Mussolini Canal when, on February 2, 1944, a German counterattack came. First came the artillery barrage. Nebelwerfers, the 6-barreled rocket launchers the Americans called screaming memes. The sound was psychological torture. A rising shriek followed by devastating explosions. Then came the armor. A German Mark IV tank appeared through the smoke, its 75-millimeter gun traversing, looking for targets. Behind it, a half-track with infantry. The one thing infantry fears most. 30 tons of armored steel that can't be stopped with rifles. Murphy's platoon had one bazooka with 2 rockets. The lieutenant was frozen, paralyzed by the sight of the tank. The men were starting to panic. Someone had to do something. Murphy didn't wait for orders. He grabbed the bazooka from the soldier, who was holding it, along with both rockets. Then he did something that defied all tactical sense. He crawled toward the tank, using shell craters and dead ground for concealment, moving during artillery explosions when visibility was worst. Murphy worked his way to within 30 yards of the Mark IV. Point-blank range for the tank's machine guns and main gun. If the crew spotted him, he was dead. He aimed for the tank's thinner side armor just behind the turret. He fired. The rocket hit perfectly. The shaped charge penetrated the armor. The tank began burning. Smoke poured from the hatches. The crew bailed out, and Murphy cut them down with his carbine. Then, while German infantry was still processing what had happened, Murphy loaded his second rocket. He aimed at the half-track that was bringing up infantry, fired, direct hit. The half-track exploded, killing or wounding everyone inside. In 90 seconds, Murphy had destroyed both armored vehicles and broken the German assault. His platoon counterattacked while the Germans were in confusion. They drove the Germans back. Murphy was awarded his first Silver Star. But the citation doesn't mention the part where Murphy's hands were shaking so badly after the action that he couldn't light a cigarette. He survived Sicily, Salerno, Anzio, Rome. By August 1944, when the 3rd Infantry Division invaded southern France, Murphy had been wounded twice and promoted to staff sergeant. The too small farm boy now had a reputation that preceded him. Near Montélimar, France, his platoon was ambushed. The lieutenant, his commander, was killed in the opening volley. Sergeant Murphy didn't wait for orders. He became the order. He took command of the platoon. The situation was impossible. 18 Americans against a German company of over 100. For 2 hours, Sergeant Murphy held a critical crossroads. He directed his men's fire. He exposed himself to draw German attention away from his troops. He personally killed 15 enemy soldiers. The crossroads held. The Army, finally realizing what they had, gave Murphy a battlefield commission. On October 14, 1944, the kid who was too small to enlist was now Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy. But combat has a price. By January 1945, Murphy was no longer the 16-year-old kid. He was 19, but he looked 40. He had seen almost every one of his original friends killed or wounded. He had personally killed over 100 enemy soldiers. He had nightmares, flashbacks. But there was no time to process trauma. The war wasn't over. The Colmar Pocket was the last piece of French soil the Wehrmacht controlled. Hitler had ordered it held at all costs. He sent the 2nd SS Mountain Division, elite troops, veterans of brutal fighting in Norway. For Company B, 15th Infantry Regiment, the situation was beyond desperate. In 5 days of constant fighting from January 21st to 26th, they had lost 102 men killed or wounded. All officers except Murphy were dead or evacuated. From full strength of 187 men, they were down to 40 effectives. The survivors were zombies. No sleep for 3 days. Frostbite. Trench foot. They tried to dig foxholes, but the ground was frozen solid. Murphy himself was fighting with a fresh leg wound from shrapnel. He told no one. To show weakness was to be evacuated. To be evacuated was to abandon his men. Private Anthony Abramsky described their condition. "We were finished. Done. Half the guys couldn't feel their feet. Our machine guns kept jamming from the cold. We knew the Germans were going to hit us. We just didn't know when." January 26, 1945, 1:40 p.m. The attack came. Private First Class. Donald Ekman was the first to see them through the gray winter haze. You could see the pennants on the antennas of the German tanks. 6 of them, Mark IVs and Panthers. And behind them, Jesus Christ, it looked like the whole German army. Maybe 250 infantry, all in white snow camouflage. They looked like ghosts coming across that frozen field. Murphy grabbed his field telephone and called for artillery support. Then he assessed his assets. 2 M10 tank destroyers, 40 exhausted men, no reserves, no backup. Math didn't lie. They were going to be overrun. At 600 yards, the M10 tank destroyers opened fire. One of them scored a hit on a German tank, setting it ablaze. But at 400 yards, the second M10 took a direct hit from a German 88mm gun. The shell punched through the thin top armor. The M10's diesel fuel caught fire immediately. Black, oily smoke poured from the engine compartment. The crew bailed out, running for cover. In minutes, maybe seconds, the fire would reach the ammunition. When that happened, the 51 high-explosive shells stored in the M10's hull would detonate. The entire vehicle would become a bomb. Murphy made his decision in less than 3 seconds. He ordered his men to fall back 100 yards to the tree line. Every one of them thought they were about to die. Then Murphy did something that defied every instinct for self-preservation, every regulation, every tactical doctrine. Instead of retreating with his men, he ran toward the burning M10. This is the moment that defines heroism. Not the big speeches, not the dramatic music. Just a 19-year-old boy running toward fire because his friends need him. Murphy climbed onto the M10's turret. The metal was already hot enough to burn through his boots. Flames licked up from the engine compartment. The acrid smoke choked his lungs. Beneath him, he could feel the heat building. The ammunition would cook off any second. He grabbed the Browning M250 caliber machine gun, mounted on the turret ring. This is where the impossible began. In front of him, 250 German infantry at 300 yards and closing. 6 tanks providing covering fire. Behind him, his 40 men watching in horror from the tree line, certain they were witnessing his death. Beneath him, a vehicle literally on fire, loaded with enough explosives to vaporize him. Murphy opened fire. The Browning M2 is arguably the finest heavy machine gun ever designed. Invented by John Browning in 1921, it fires the 50 BMG cartridge. Each round weighs 4 ounces and travels at 2,900 feet per second. It can penetrate an inch of armor plate. It can tear a human body apart. Rate of fire, 550 rounds per minute. Maximum effective range, 1,800 meters. In the hands of a normal soldier, it's a weapon of suppression. You spray the general area and hope. In the hands of Audie Murphy, it was a surgeon's scalpel. He wasn't spraying, he was aiming. 1 short burst per target, 3 to 5 rounds. See a German, lead him by 3 feet. Fire, watch him drop. Move to the next German. The cold arithmetic he'd learned hunting rabbits in Hunt County. Calculate, fire, kill, move on. No hesitation, no emotion, just mathematics. Staff Sergeant William Paulson, watching from the tree line, later described it. Murph wasn't shooting angry. That's what was terrifying. He was shooting the way you'd balance a checkbook. Calm, methodical, like he was doing arithmetic. See a German. Eliminate the German. See the next German. The Germans couldn't understand what was happening. Their infantry was being cut down in the open. They tried to take cover, but the frozen ground provided none. The tanks couldn't get a clear shot. The thick black smoke from the diesel fire obscured Murphy's position. They could see the muzzle flashes. They could hear the distinctive bark of the .50 caliber, but they couldn't see the man firing it. German officers screamed orders. Advance, flank him, kill him. But every time a group of Germans tried to move, Murphy's fire found them. Then Murphy did something that showed his true tactical genius. While firing the .50 caliber with his right hand, steadying it against the violent recoil, he picked up the field telephone handset with his left. He called his artillery forward observer. "This is Murphy. I need fire mission." The forward observer, Lieutenant Walter Weiss-Fenning, couldn't believe what he was hearing. Murphy was requesting 105 mm howitzer fire on the Germans, who were surrounding him. "Give me coordinates," the FO said. Murphy's response was ice cold. "Fire on my position." "Sir, that will kill you." "Then you'd better be accurate. Just do it." For the next hour, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy stood on that burning tank destroyer and orchestrated a symphony of destruction. With his right hand, he fired the .50 caliber. With his left, he directed artillery fire via field telephone. He was a human fire direction center. The Germans weren't just running from his machine gun. They were running from 105 mm shells that Murphy was dropping within 50 yards of his own position. He was using himself as the aiming point. Any mistakes by the artillery crew would kill him instantly. But Murphy understood something about artillery that most infantry officers never learned. He understood the blast radius, the fragmentation pattern. He knew exactly how close he could call fire without killing himself. It was mathematics again. Distance, angle of fall, fuse settings. This is how you defeat 250 men when you're alone. The German attack stalled. Their infantry couldn't advance through the artillery barrage. Their tanks couldn't suppress Murphy through the smoke. German soldiers began surrendering. Others retreated. For 1 hour, from 1:45 p.m. to 2:45 p.m., Audie Murphy held that position. 1 hour that felt like a lifetime. The heat from the fire was blistering his skin. The smoke was suffocating. His old leg wound had reopened from the stress. Blood ran down into his boot. The M10's ammunition was cooking off in small bursts, rounds exploding randomly. The entire vehicle was shaking, and still he fired. At 2:45 p.m., Murphy fired his last round of .50 caliber ammunition. He'd gone through all 1,500 rounds on the M10. The belt was empty. The Germans were in full retreat. Murphy climbed off the M10 and limped back to his men. His uniform was singed black. His face was covered in soot and blood. His hands were burned raw. He could barely walk. 5 minutes later, the M10's ammunition finally reached critical temperature. The entire vehicle exploded in a fireball visible for miles. If Murphy had stayed aboard another 30 seconds, he would have been vaporized. The battlefield was littered with German dead and wounded. Over 50 killed by Murphy's fire. Dozens more killed by the artillery he directed. The 3rd Infantry Division's after-action report stated, "Second Lieutenant Murphy's action broke the German attack and saved Company B from annihilation. His courage under fire is without equal in this division's history." Murphy was evacuated to a field hospital. Doctors treated his burns and his leg wound. Then Murphy did something that defined his character. He refused to leave. Against medical advice, against orders, he walked out of the hospital and returned to Company B 2 days later. On February 2, 1946, at the Pentagon, President Harry Truman placed the Medal of Honor around Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy's neck. The full citation describes his action in detail, but it can't capture the reality. The heat, the smoke, the certainty of death, the cold calculation that made him stay when every fiber of his being screamed to run. Murphy became the most decorated soldier in American history. 33 awards and decorations, including every U.S. Army Combat Award for valor. But medals don't heal wounds. After the war, Murphy struggled with what we now call PTSD, but what he knew as the demons: nightmares, flashbacks, insomnia. He slept with a loaded pistol under his pillow for years. He woke up strangling people in his sleep. He couldn't hold down a regular job. Actor James Cagney saw Murphy's picture on the cover of Life magazine and invited him to Hollywood. Murphy became a movie star, making over 40 films, including To Hell and Back, where he played himself. But fame didn't erase the nightmares. In 1955, Murphy did something brave. He spoke publicly about his battle fatigue. In an era when admitting mental weakness could destroy a career, when veterans were expected to just get over it, America's most decorated soldier said, "I'm struggling. I need help." Because Murphy admitted it, thousands of other veterans felt they could ask for help. He broke the stigma. He gave them permission to be human. On May 28, 1971, a small private plane crashed in Virginia during bad weather. Audie Murphy was killed. He was 46 years old. He was buried at Arlington National Cemetery with full military honors. His funeral was one of the largest in Arlington's history. Over 250,000 people came. But here's what history often forgets. When Murphy died, he died nearly broke. Bad investments, mismanagement by others, gambling debts. His estate was a mess. His widow, Pamela, was left with almost nothing. She was 50 years old with 2 teenage sons and a mountain of debts. The world expected her to fade away. A tragic footnote. But Pamela Murphy was made of the same steel as her husband. She didn't write a tell-all book. She didn't sell his medals. Instead, she walked into the Sepulveda Veterans Affairs Hospital in Los Angeles and asked for a job. Not a high-level position. A patient liaison. A clerk. For the next 35 years, Pamela Murphy worked at that VA hospital. Every day. She became a one-woman army for veterans nobody else would listen to. She saw veterans shattered by Vietnam, suffering from the same battle fatigue that had haunted Audie. She saw them getting lost in bureaucracy, files misplaced, benefits denied, appointments canceled. These men were her husband's ghosts, and she would not abandon them. When a doctor wouldn't see a veteran, she made the call. When a benefit check was lost, she found it. When a bureaucrat said no, Pamela walked into their office and didn't leave until that no became yes. She worked until she was 87 years old. She retired in 2007. When she died in 2010, she was buried next to Audie at Arlington. That is the true legacy. That is the ripple effect. Audie Murphy didn't just stop a German attack. He broke the myth that real warriors don't struggle. He made it acceptable to admit you're haunted. And Pamela finished his mission by helping thousands of veterans for 35 years. That's how wars are truly won. Not by the generals who read doctrine from headquarters, but by the individuals who see the fatal flaw. The recruiters saw a boy too small. The Army found a weapon. The Germans saw an impossible defense. Murphy saw simple mathematics. One man, one machine gun, one field telephone. Cold calculation. If I stay here, I die. If I run, my men die. The math was clear. He stayed. And by staying on that burning tank for 1 hour, Second Lieutenant Audie Murphy saved Company B, stopped a German offensive, and proved that courage isn't the absence of fear. Courage is doing the math and accepting the answer. If you found this story as compelling as we did, please take a moment to like this video. It helps us share more forgotten stories from the Second World War. Subscribe to stay connected with these untold histories. Each one matters. Each one deserves to be remembered. And we'd love to hear from you. Leave a comment below telling us where you're watching from. Our community spans from Texas to Tasmania. From veterans to history enthusiasts, you're part of something special here. Thank you for watching, and thank you for keeping these stories alive.